boundaries is actually a form of self-care because they are not a burden on you. They protect your energy. They help create space for rest, for creativity. And remember what I said? You can be grieving, you can be healing, and you can still have what? Joy. You still can have joy. Boundaries help us recharge. They allow us to show up rested and not resentful. I'm Sandy Rose, and this is the Restorative Space, where body, mind, and spirit meet in truth. From tension to tenderness, we explore how to heal, feel, and return home to ourselves. Welcome, and thank you for joining me this week. As a quick reminder, don't forget, you can always find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, as well as other platforms. And please like, subscribe, and share so that you can continue to be with me on this healing journey. As you all know, for the past few episodes, we have been on a journey of permission, giving ourselves permission to do things that we've either never done before, or we may be having a hard time doing, or we may just need somebody to hold our hand as we go through this journey. The first installment was all about healing. Now, whether you're healing from childhood trauma, maybe you're healing from a bad breakup, maybe you're healing from the death of a loved one, or maybe you're just healing because, sometimes life be lifing, and we have some things that we need to heal from. The second installment was all about feeling. So now that we've given ourselves permission to heal, so what about these feelings that are going to come up, right? We may get sad, we may get mad, we may be angry, we may be glad, we may be happy. And what do we do with all these feelings? We have to learn how to sort them out, put them in the right box, So we've learned how to feel because, as a reminder, your feelings are always valid. But as you know, we just need to know what to do with them, right? Now, this third installment, now that we know that we have permission to heal, and now that we know we have permission to feel all the feelings, well, how do we navigate through some of this? How do we cut through some of these weeds? And how do we step into this journey? Well, one of the biggest things that we must do is set a few boundaries. This third installment is all about that, setting boundaries. Whether you're setting boundaries with yourself, you're setting boundaries with a loved one, a coworker, a romantic partner, in the job, out the job, setting boundaries. And for a lot of us, that's the little part where we get caught up because we're so used to people pleasing, which, if I am admitting or being transparent, I've done that quite a bit. And now I'm learning how to not people please, but to please myself. So we're going to talk about that today. And as it gets deep, because we're going to break this down into a few segments, as this gets a little deep or a little heavy for us, we're going to pause and we're going to do what I like to call our 3, 3, and 3. And we're going to start the episode off with that, just like we usually do. How that looks is we're going to take in a breath for 3. We will hold for 3, and we will release for 3. So let's begin. Inhale and exhale. And again, inhale and exhale. Wonderful. Welcome back to the restorative space. Let's talk about these boundaries. So, boundaries, permission to set boundaries. Keep in mind, boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks. And once you walk through that door and you lock it, no one else can get in unless you let them. They keep us safe, but they still allow us connection. They help us manage our energy, protect our peace, and preserve the love that we give to ourselves and the love that we give to others. Now, if I'm being honest, I know for me, setting boundaries can sometimes be a little uncomfortable. I always have a problem with the feeling like I'm being selfish. And I'm always questioning that because actually, I was raised, and many of us were raised to believe that being nice meant saying yes, even when we wanted to say no. And I now know that I can always be kind, while still saying a gentle but firm no. Now, maybe you learned early on that love had conditions, that saying no meant rejection or it meant guilt. Or maybe you've been the strong one, like we are always talking about the strong one, the nurturer, the caretaker. You give and you give and you give until your body finally whispers, I've had enough. And for the most part, we don't listen. But today, we're going to learn that when that body says it's enough, what do they say about enough? That enough means enough. Now, I know that boundaries can become difficult because they challenge our conditioning. Like I said, we've been conditioned to always say yes, especially us people pleasers. They require us to believe that our needs matter because they do, not just other people's needs or making other people comfortable. Because you know what happens when you make others comfortable? You make yourself uncomfortable. And here's something that's honest and truthful that I want you to hold on to. Setting a boundary doesn't push love away. It actually brings love to you. It makes love sustainable. When we say no to what drains us, we create space to say yes to what restores us. All right, let's dive into it. So, how do you recognize when you need to set boundaries? So, if you listen to the last installment about all of these feelings and these emotions, remember that before we can set boundaries, we have to feel where those boundaries are missing in our lives. And we have to know where those boundaries are missing in our lives. So, if you're unable to kind of pinpoint where those boundaries are missing, here's a few signs that the boundaries need to be strengthened. Maybe you said yes, but then you feel resentful or exhausted. Maybe you avoid certain people or situations because you feel drained afterwards. You feel responsible for other people's emotions, or you find yourself explaining your choices over and over and over again. And that's a big one for a lot of us. That used to be a big one for me, where I would explain myself. I would say something like, yeah, I can't do such and such today because I have to go and take my daughter to wherever, or because I have to do blah, blah, blah. And then whenever I would do that, I would feel this little twinge of tightness in my chest. And I would feel a little guilt rising quickly when I would have to do that. But actually, you do not need to explain yourself. If you don't have it, you just don't have it. And honestly, your body knows before your mind catches up. So if you pay attention to that tension in your shoulders and that tightness in your chest, that gut feeling of saying, I don't want to, then guess what? You don't want to. And it's okay to say no. And it's okay to then turn around and say, I matter too. Now, there is an emotional side of setting these boundaries. Like I just mentioned, when we set the boundaries, emotions rise up: guilt, fear, anxiety. And that's normal. You're not doing it wrong. You're just healing a pattern, a very old pattern that you were conditioned to have. And maybe that pattern served you in the past, but it doesn't serve you any longer. It doesn't serve you. And usually what happens is guilt often shows up first. It whispers, you're being mean, or they won't like you anymore. And because some of us have that little small fear of abandonment, something that we'll talk about at a different date and time, you don't want to hear all of that echoing in your mind. But guilt is just the echo of your old self. The one who thought that love meant overextending. And it doesn't, because again, the person that gets hurt is you. So let me help you out. Here's your permission. You are allowed to disappoint others without dishonoring yourself. So what that means that you are allowed to say no and still be the wonderful person that you believe that you are and that you actually are. It's okay to say no, and I'm going to say that throughout this entire conversation. You are allowed to say no. And keep in mind, boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about caring for yourself enough to show up honestly. You can still be kind, you can be compassionate, and you can be firm while still holding space and boundaries. All right, that was a lot. I admit that was a lot. And I know if I'm feeling it a little bit, maybe you are too. So let's go ahead and do our 3, 3, and 3 one time. Let's begin. Inhale and exhale. Shake it off. Unclench your jaw. Let's not overthink. Lower those shoulders. And let's keep moving. Now, how exactly do we set those boundaries? Especially when it's something new for us. Especially when it's something new. So I've thought about this quite a bit and done a little research, and I've come up with 4 stages of boundary setting. So let's talk about it. The first one is clarity. Identify what feels off. I want you to ask yourself, what drains me? And what do I need to feel safe, respected, or rested? The second one is communication. Speak your needs calmly and clearly. You don't have to over-explain. Again, like I mentioned before, you can say, I'm not available tonight, but let's connect another day without saying why. Just communicate clearly. And then I want you to practice some consistency because you will be tested. The people in your family, your friends that are used to you being the it girl, the it guy, they're going to push back at you because they are comfortable with your old patterns. But you stand firm. You stand firm. And you use those boundaries for your good. And then remember, you can still offer compassion, which is the fourth one. First for yourself and then for others. Because boundaries teach people how to love you. It's not a punishment to them, and it's not a punishment to you. And to be honest with you, the first person that you need to teach some boundaries to is you. And you need to teach you how to love you. Okay, so since we're talking about how to set boundaries, you may be wondering, well, how do I do that? What exactly do I say? Well, here's a couple of things that you can use. You can say, that doesn't work for me. I need time to think about that. I appreciate the invite, but I'm not available. Again, be simple, be clear, and be loving. Now, a lot of us are wondering, okay, that's cool. I can set boundaries with people at work, and I can set boundaries with my kids, and I can set boundaries with my family members. I may even be able to set boundaries with myself. But how do I set boundaries in my relationship and keep it, especially when it started off a certain way? Well, first of all, they are vital in a loving relationship because in those relationships, boundaries protect emotional safety. They define what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. It tells people how we want to be spoken to, how we want to be touched, supported, and respected. Healthy relationships have room for both people's needs, okay? Remember that. But when one person dominates the emotional space, then that's when resentment starts to grow. And if you're in a relationship where your boundaries are ignored, honey, let me tell you, and I'm sorry to say, that's not love. That's control and that's neglect, as well as you neglecting yourself. Just remember that because true love respects limits. It says, I want you to feel safe enough to be yourself. I want you to feel safe enough to be yourself. And when you're in certain situations, I want you to ask yourself, do I feel emotionally safe with this person? Can I say no without fear of judgment or without fear of them leaving me behind? Do I shrink or do I speak up around them? Which one? Your answers reveal the health of your boundaries. It reveals the truth. Now, let me pause for just a second and let me say this. I am not a licensed therapist, nor am I trying to take the place of a licensed therapist. I suggest that if some of this is too heavy, if some of this is too real for you and you don't know how to navigate this and you are having issues with boundaries, especially in certain relationships, please seek the help of a licensed professional. And if you're having a hard time finding one, you can always reach out to me and my team, and we will help grab a list of people that you can talk to. Now, with that being said, not only are boundaries important, but in the month of November, we're going to discuss self care and what that looks like and all the different things that you can do to provide yourself with self care. Well, boundaries is actually a form of self care because they are not a burden on you. They protect your energy. They help create space for rest, for creativity. And remember what I said? You can be grieving, you can be healing, and you can still have what? Joy. You still can have joy. You know, boundaries help us recharge. They allow us to show up rested and not resentful. Your peace is your power, honey. And boundaries are how you keep it charged. And again, I'm learning just like you are. And if I'm being honest, I'm having a great time doing so. Now let's reflect over what we've talked about. We're going to do the 3, 3, and 3 one more time. Let's begin. Inhale and exhale. Now, think of one area in your life that feels heavy or overwhelming. Maybe it's a person, a job, maybe it's an expectation that you've placed on yourself. And I want you to hold that thought for just a moment. Close your eyes. Take a moment to breathe. And again, think of one area of your life that feels heavy or overwhelming. Hold that thought. And I want you to repeat either to yourself or out loud. I give myself permission to protect my peace. I am not responsible for how others respond to my boundaries. My needs are valid. Now let those words settle in. Let them settle in. And while you're sitting there thinking about this, just remember you are not hard to love. You are learning to love yourself a little better. And I'm going to say it again so that you don't have to rewind. I give myself permission to protect my peace. I am not responsible for how others respond to my boundaries. My needs are valid. Remember that boundaries are not about separation. They're about sustainability. You deserve to feel safe in your body, in your relationships, and in your life. If this episode has helped you, please share it with someone who's learning to set boundaries too. Remember to find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Like, subscribe, and share. We're still here. Join us. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Sandy Rose, and this is the Restorative Space. And I am so happy to be sharing this with you.
You have just listened to part 3 of our Permission series, Permission to Set Boundaries, part of the new Permission series, a journey inspired by Sandy Rose's own truth and transformation. Stay tuned for the next episode, Permission to Grow, as she guides us through releasing what no longer serves us and finds peace within the process. This is The Restorative Space with Sandy Rose.